Wow.
So now that we're on the recording, welcome to everybody. It is our pleasure to welcome Destiny Magnett from Churches for Middle East Peace, where she will be discussing faith in action, calls to courage for Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East. This conversation will center on the question, how can Christians in the U.S. seek to faithfully bear witness and respond to the crises we see unfolding across the Holy Land today? We started late, so Destiny, with your permission, I'm not going to read your bio. I'd rather have Destiny.
I prefer it that way.
There you go. Rather hear what Destiny has to say. So with that, Destiny, we thank you for sharing both your time and knowledge with us. And we wholeheartedly welcome you to Westminster. Destiny, the class is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark, and good morning again, everybody. Thanks for being here. I want to start briefly by, I know we just came out of worship, and I want to open the floor to all of you to share if there's a feeling or emotion, if there's a thought that feels heavy on your spirit, or I often say you might feel a fluttering like in your heart or in your stomach, and that's saying that maybe you want to share. So let's keep it, relatively in a word or a sentence, but if anyone wants to share, what are you bringing with you into this space as we enter into our time together this morning?
2 years.
Oh yeah.
2 years. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
2 years.
I share your heaviness.
Heaviness. Yeah.
Frustration.
Frustration. Mm-hmm. No, go ahead. Yes.
Hope.
You first. Hope.
Disappointment in mankind.
Disappointments, and then Mike, and then the
Fear.
fear. Mhm.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Just great sadness.
Mhm.
I would just say appreciation that you were able to talk about a very difficult topic and walk a very fine line.
Thank you.
And I was really impressed.
I appreciate that. So with all of this, I lead on Wednesdays with Churches for Middle East Peace a Zoom prayer time. And this is an exercise that we sometimes do in that space. And we bring with us our laments and our frustrations and our sorrows, but also our joys and our praises. And the beauty of that is all of the multitude of these emotions, the complexity of what it means to be human. In a space like this, we get to lay it all down before God. And that's part of what classes like this allow us to do, is come with that complexity, come with questions, maybe leave with even more questions than you started with, but to walk through this together. And as you heard in the sermon today, this is not easy work. It's difficult work. It's emotional work, but we're called to it. And this is part of what it means to offer our Christian witness for the sake of the church and the gospel, but also for the sake of humanity and the good of all of our world and all of humankind and our siblings far and beyond just those who are members of the body of Christ. And so how many of you already know about Churches for Middle East Peace? I'm guessing a lot of you do. I love it. That's fabulous. We're so grateful to Westminster Presbyterian for your long time church partnership and support. And so this presentation today, we're going to hear two things. First, I'm going to share some updates from on the ground, mostly in Palestine, then we'll talk a little bit about the broader region. And then we'll talk a little bit about some US initiatives and things that you can do even today to support the work and ministry of Churches for Middle East Peace and our ultimate goals of pursuing just peace for all people in the region. Though you're familiar with us already, we just got these great new videos about who CMEP is produced. So it's a 90-second video. It'll be a good refresher, and you can see what some of the project support looks like.
The violence and devastation and trauma has been utterly devastating for generations. American Christians are either ignorant of that or in some ways inadvertently contributing to it.
CMEP is this ecumenical coalition inspired by our faith to do advocacy for just policies.
We exist because of this idea that millions of Christians can have one voice that they're speaking with.
We mobilize Christians to engage in all types of advocacy: social advocacy, political advocacy, economic advocacy, and spiritual advocacy. We do speaking tours with Israelis and Palestinians and people from all over the Middle East. We elevate the voices of Christians in the region.
We are really pushing for U.S. policies that will bring about an end to conflict in the region.
All three faiths and anyone who calls the city holy ought to be able to worship freely and peacefully and with dignity.
I think the unique position we have at Churches of Middle East Peace is that we have an audience on all sides.
All the identities could to coexist next to each other, and this land has known this. It's not strange, it's not new. We can't make the change alone.
This is a contemporary conflict, and it's not that there are not solutions, it's that there have not been leaders who are willing to sacrifice and make peace. And we can help contribute to that. And peace is possible. We just have to work to make it so.
So you can see a reminder or refresher for many of you of the work we're doing at Churches for Middle East Peace. And the line that I come back to in that video over and over again is Reverend Dr. Mayalise Cannon, our executive director, who has been here at Westminster several times before, saying it's not that there are not solutions, that we have not had leaders willing to sacrifice to make peace. And I think that ties into the theme of our sermon today and of Paul's letter to Timothy of what are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of peace and justice. And that's a theme that we'll see as we're talking about what's happening on the ground today. And that theme really comes out robustly. So when they go through three of what I see and what CMEP sees as the most pressing issues on the ground, of course, we could be here for hours and hours if we are going to go through everything. And I welcome you to bring more about the ceasefire negotiations, escalations, all of that can come up during the Q&A. I'm happy to engage that. But three things and cases that we're most concerned with in this moment are combating settler violence and protecting the Christian presence in the West Bank in particular, unjust administrative detentions, and we'll talk about the case of Natalie Abudia, and then humanitarian concerns in Gaza that continue to be ongoing. Beginning with settler violence, I have a graphic here that I think is really helpful from Al Jazeera, and you can see that just in like the past year and a half, this is showing from January 2025 through June of this year, the number of settler attacks are staggering at this point. They're seeing an average of 6 a day in the West Bank, impacting communities all over. It's gotten so bad that in Taipei, the Christian village, which is kind of in this general vicinity of the West Bank, the Israeli military actually made it a closed military zone in order to try to prevent settlers from going in and out. Of course, this also means that Palestinians or anyone who wanted, or solidarity delegations trying to visit Taipei also could not go in and out. So you can see even this solution is really creating even more hostile conditions for many of the communities who are there. Again, for legal definitions, when we're talking about settlers, those are groups, you can see on this map, it's a little small, but these red dots in the, oh, this is a touch screen, I have to be careful. I like to touch things. I'll be careful. But so these red dots that you can see are within the green line, the armistice line, and they're communities that are illegal under international law. Many of them, though not all of them, are created with the explicit goal of eventually having Israeli control of all of the land. And so happy to get more into that, but this is a legal definition that we're using when we're talking about settlers, and many of them are extremists who believe that clearing the land, so ethnic cleansing or definitionally genocide, is the only way that they will gain control of this place is by emptying it. It's to such an extent that even our ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, used for the first time in this administration the words Israeli terrorists to describe some of these settler groups. That's from Ambassador Huckabee, who is not necessarily what I would call a strong ally. And so that is significant, that's how bad it is. And you can see a lot of the attacks are concentrated. Hebron has been really, really bad to the south. Bethlehem is here. This is East Jerusalem. And then Ramallah and Nablus have been really, really significantly impacted. Just last week, I mentioned Taibe, which is one of the oldest Christian villages in the West Bank. They have an enduring presence. They faced a lot of attacks. They actually had a patriarchal visit from Cardinal Pizzaballa, who is the Latin patriarch in Jerusalem. And I pulled up this quote that he offered in Mass in Taibe last week. He said, "We want to remain a community that gives birth to life without giving up our rights, our right to life." He said, "So be courageous. Do not be afraid." And that's his message to the people who are facing these conditions. And the Cardinal has been a really steadfast force. He's made several pastoral visits now to the Holy Family Church in Gaza with Father Romanelli, who we know, he's the parish priest there, and has been really a strong voice in speaking out, but also pastoring to these communities going through unprecedented times. And so what do? At Churches for Middle East Peace, we have out right now an action alert that we wrote specifically for August recess to oppose settlement expansion. I put the link, there's full language on our website, but we're asking constituents here in the US to really ask for two things. On a congressional level, we're asking our congresspeople to speak out, to say, anything to condemn these settler attacks, and also to push the Trump administration to reimpose sanctions on some of those settler extremist groups. So I mentioned Huckabee used the word Israeli terrorist. Under both the previous Trump administration and the Biden administration, previous administrations before that, many of those far extremist groups had US sanctions imposed upon them. However, on Trump's first day in office in this administration, he blanket repealed all of those, his very first day in office. And so with things getting as bad as they are, reimposing those sanctions is another thing we can push for at an administration level. And that's one lever for that is through our congressional representatives, both in the House and Senate. I'll say writ large that Churches for Middle East Peace, because we're a 501c3, we don't get engaged in electoral politics. We don't endorse candidates. None of that is within our purview as a 501c3, but we are planning for what the midterms might look like. And it's worth making note that the Israeli elections are being held October 27th, I believe, maybe 28th. And then our midterm elections are November 3rd. And so both of those right back to back have potential to create a lot of new strategies. We don't know exactly what it'll look like yet. So we're planning for multiple scenarios, both within what the new Israeli civil society will look like and our connections there. And then of course, in what the new congressional makeup is going to be after the midterm elections. So stay tuned. We'll have more on that after we get through the next couple of months. But August recess is a good time, particularly if your senators or representatives are in midterm races, to go and make your perspective known while they're here in their homes for August. And this language could be helpful in doing that. The second case I want to talk about in the West Bank is part of a larger pattern of what we call administrative detention. And so because the West Bank is under, by legal definitions, military occupation, anyone who's arrested there goes through military courts, not what we would see as traditional, judicial systems. And part of what that also means is that people can be arrested and not told what they're being charged with for months and even years on end, and just held with no charges, no news of when their case might be. And that's the case for this young woman, Natalie Aboudeya, who was detained alongside 3 other young women. They're her roommates at Birzeit University. And the other young women are named Julan Abu Awad, Sama Safi, and Layla Khalil. Natalie is a Christian and a member of an evangelical Lutheran church in Jordan and the Holy Land congregation in Beit Sahor, which is right next to Bethlehem if we were to look back at that map. And then Sama Safi is actually a US citizen. And so Senator Van Hollen from Maryland has been very vocal and sort of leading the charge on Summa's case because she's a US citizen. And then Christian constituencies following the lead of our Lutheran siblings in the Holy Land. Their bishop has been very outspoken about this, have been calling our communities to prayer and advocacy around Natalie, noting that all 4 girls are still in detention. And we're particularly asking for both prayer, and prayer always should be paired with action for this court date that she has upcoming on September 23. But she's been in detention for more than 2 months, and her lawyer can sometimes talk to her, but we still have no idea what she's even charged with. And the conditions of her imprisonment have been also put into question. One of the other girls has some underlying health conditions that have been quite exacerbated as a result of her detainment. On a broader scale, though we do advocacy around individual cases like this, again, it goes back to the systems that are at play of administrative detention. We've done work over the years on particularly ending child detainments. And so Natalie is an adult, but a young woman, but children are also often subject to these conditions that are, there was legislation back in 2021 that was called the No Way to Treat a Child Act that came out and was in support. I talk about that a bit. Does anyone know Miss Rachel, the children's educator influencer? Yeah. Does that ring a bell? A few people are nodding their heads. I published an op-ed in Baptist News Global last winter called "The Church Should Be More Like Miss Rachel," where I talk about child detainments. So if you want to read that, I welcome it. And then we come to Gaza. This is from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Relief within the United Nations. And so one thing I want to share, I'm going to not touch the screen this time, is that Gaza from top to bottom is only about like 25 miles approximately in length. So you can think about like the distance from here to, like I'm saying with the Moshers, it's like about that distance to their home in New Jersey. And then across, of course, even narrower. So we're talking about such a small amount of land and a population of just over 2 million people. And so with this Israeli military presence shown by the red shadowing here, you can see that that 25 miles plus maybe, 5 miles across is shrinking. And so we're starting to see in the humanitarian side, while people are also still dying in military operations, despite the ceasefire that's been in place since last October, the military is continuing to encroach closer and closer. So we have this Israeli military presence, and then the area where the coordination points go in even further. And so displacement is massive. Like something like 80% of people in Gaza have been displaced at least once, maybe twice. Schools have been destroyed. Infrastructure is still in absolute ruins. And we're putting 2 million people into smaller and smaller and smaller areas, which is causing spread of, disease, inhumane conditions. People are still living in tents. We're approaching, again, the winter months, which tend to be particularly devastating for the elderly and the very young who are at risk in those kinds of conditions. And so while there's limited humanitarian relief getting in, the conditions have become so exacerbated that there's more need, and it will take years and years after the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces in order to see any kind of solution. But of course, we have President Trump's 20-point peace plan, right? That this could be a solution. Except right now, so we had phase one. Phase one was the release of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. The last hostage left Gaza. Phase one has been achieved. Phase two is made up of a few components, but the most pressing of the current negotiations that are being mediated are the disarmament of Hamas, so the complete demilitarization of Hamas in exchange for Israeli military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. It's every single week. If you come to our news briefings on Thursday, we touch on this. It seems like every week we're seeing more and more about Hamas saying they've agreed to disarm, and then Netanyahu saying this proposal for disarmament is unacceptable to us, or the other way around, where you're saying the Israelis or the Americans are saying we've reached an agreement, and then Hamas says, well, those aren't conditions under which we won't disarm. And so this so-called peace plan has been in quite a stalemate at this point, and that's how we still have this situation that's causing the population to be shrunk, or put into smaller geographic areas, I should say, things going on and on and on. And so whether this will bear fruit, and one thing that I will say writ large, first, fewer people dying, ideally no people dying, that's a first win. But as Martin Luther King said, apparently I'm gonna quote him a lot today, I think it's apt, the absence of violence does not mean the presence of justice. And that's the kind of peace that we're getting under the fulfillment of this 20-point peace plan, is a peace where maybe there's been some cessation in the egregious level of killings every single day, though people are still dying, and I want to be very clear about that. But we're not seeing the kinds of structural changes or agreement to the kinds of structural changes of things like occupation, of the realities of movement within the Gaza Strip that would lead to the kind of peace where there is equality and justice and liberation. And so that's something to keep in mind. I continue to hope and pray that this can be a mechanism that the Lord is using to create some semblance and to move in the right direction at least. But we're at this stalemate, this stoppage point at the moment. A few more on the humanitarian situation that's being exacerbated by the length of these negotiations, I would say. Also, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, 70% of infants and young children are experiencing moderate to severe food insecurity still. 93% of school buildings have been destroyed or remain non-functional. So as our family members, our loved ones are getting ready to go back to school, keep in mind the children of Gaza whose schools have been destroyed to such a degree and the impact that that will have. And you can see then over 630,000 school-aged children have no access to informal or to in-person formal education as we're getting ready. So this is where we'll see the impacts of these atrocities will last not only until Hamas disarms or the Israeli military withdraws, the educational and infrastructural damage is going to persist for decades, if not generations. 74% of road networks destroyed, 76% of cultural heritage sites destroyed, and then you can see 1.4 million people require dignified shelter support. So that means they're living in tents or equivalent structures, with 76.6% of housing units in Gaza destroyed over the course of this war. It's dire. So I'm gonna pause so we can take a breath, and I think it's good to sit with this. This is the exercise of bearing witness, right? Is that we hear and our hearts are shattered, and yet we don't look away. And we ask ourselves, from our places of power and privilege, what might we be able to do? Even in some small way. And that's the exercise of bearing witness, of not looking away and then doing something about it. And this is connected all across the things we're seeing here in our country and globally writ large. So we do have another action alert out for this that's connected specifically to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network and related to medical corridors. So this is one small piece of the overall humanitarian puzzle. Something else that would be great to bring up with your representatives in congressional offices is the restoration of funding to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is responsible for delivering humanitarian assistance, education, other kinds of social programs all across both Gaza and the West Bank that the US ended funding for some time ago now. But the East Jerusalem Hospital Network is a great ask, regardless of where your member might stand on this issue, because it's asking for cancer patients in Gaza to be able to seek treatment for cancer in the East Jerusalem Hospital Network. There's some individual cases, but the medical corridor more broadly is a crucial component of this, and funding these hospitals, 9 of them which are run by Christian organizations, some of them Catholic. The Augusta Victoria is in East Jerusalem. It's run by the Lutherans and is a cancer hospital specifically. And so we're asking for the funding of the East Jerusalem Hospital Network and the encouragement of this medical corridor to be in place in the fiscal year ahead. And this is something that we do see bipartisan support for, because kids who have cancer should be able to get treatment, and that shouldn't be controversial, right? And this is like one of the places where we see glimmers of hope. We see so much partisanship and division and all of this, but this is an area where we ask ourselves, where do we come together? What is the foundation of our values? And it might seem like a small victory, but for the family of a child who's able to get treatment they wouldn't otherwise be able to, it means the entire world.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to pause here. This is a survey of what we've been looking at in Gaza and the West Bank. I think maybe because we want to do questions and discussion at the end, but if there's anything that anyone wants to ask, we can come back to it in the Q&A section before I get into some US specific things. Yeah.
I did one question
Yeah, sure.
on the Trump peace plan on the disarmament.
Yeah.
Is it correct that what the United States had attempted to negotiate was a staged disarmament
Yeah.
and a staged withdrawal that would require both sides to take incremental steps? Hamas agreed to the incremental steps, and Israel said, no, we won't agree to start withdrawals until disarmament is complete. Is that where
That's what we've heard the latest on. It's like a 15 points. We have the 20-point peace plan, and then we have this like 15-point disarmament plan that was incremental, exactly as you described. And from what we've heard through, there's some word from the Pakistan is provided the mediators for some of this. And so from the US announced that, you know, Hamas had agreed to this incremental plan. And then Netanyahu kind of came out and said, you know, Israel will not begin to withdraw until Hamas has completely disarmed. And that's where things stand as of late. And the Americans with Pakistani mediators, my understanding is that they're working to try to get some movement on the Israeli side to have some compromise around an incremental disarmament versus just a complete, stop.
My question has to do with Israeli politics.
Yeah.
So looking at their election, have there been projections about who might win that?
Yeah. Good question.
And how that affects this whole piece?
Yeah, this is important. This one I'm going to come back to after we get through the recording, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
On the statistics page for Gaza,
Yeah.
I didn't see anything mentioned about medical treatment, medical care. Could you discuss a little bit?
Yeah, there's great data from this office also on medical availability. Essentially, what we're seeing is that the hospitals are now, they're still not functioning at full capacity, certainly. Some of them are at least open, like the Al-Ali Hospital is open, is treating people to a better degree than they were able to during the height of the Israeli military incursions, but for many of the patients with either acute pre-existing conditions like cancer, for example, they're ill-equipped to serve those patients. They still don't have all of the supplies and medical, like medicines that they need. And so anyone with acute illness, injury, there's still evacuations that need to happen to be able to get the most robust treatment available for those patients, which has sometimes been, that's part of the East Jerusalem Hospital Network piece. Sometimes we've also seen patients evacuated through the Rafah crossing, which is into Egypt, to seek medical care and treatment. And there have been some cases where mostly children, but people who have faced dire injuries have even come to the US to seek medical care for their, in this case, mostly injuries versus illnesses. So that's something else to continue to monitor. Yeah.
So have the attacks and raids on the hospitals in Gaza, have they ceased as part of this temporary?
I think not entirely, but the scale is much lower than it once was. And I've gotten to hear, I was in Seattle a few months ago, and I got to meet with an American who had served a medical mission in Gaza and shared a bit about her experience in coming back. And It was basically the scale of need is so much higher than what the hospitals are able to meet still. And there's still some attacks happening. The hospitals are not completely removed from that sphere. But it's better than it was. Yeah.
About maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, we met with our Congresswoman Sarah McBride.
Yeah.
And we shared with her our concern about the East Jerusalem corridor. And she was very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
And she agreed that she would come back and talk to both Senator Coons and Senator Rochester.
Great.
That the three of them could work on that together, but we haven't heard anything beyond that as to whether they've met or whether they've been able to coordinate a strategy and go. So we're waiting to hear more on that.
Good. I'm glad to hear that Representative McBride that she was receptive, and hopefully we'll continue. I was going to say, keep sending those follow-up emails. I'm looking at the Mosher Center, and I know several of you are involved in that advocacy work. I'm going to keep us moving for now. I'm looking at the clock. And I'll go through these. So these are actions here in the US that are upcoming in some of our initiatives. So this will be a little bit quicker. But one component that we have recently started doing advocacy around is the case of Mohsen Mahdawi, who's Palestinian. He has a green card. He's been a legal resident here in the US for about a decade, and was a student at Columbia and was a leader in some of the student organizing that happened in the spring of 2024 there. And as a result of his peaceful advocacy, has faced significant attacks on his immigration status. He was actually first, and this will sound familiar for those of us who work in immigration justice, he showed up to what he thought was a citizenship interview and was arrested. And that was the beginning of this case that has continued to move through the federal court system. And so he was one of our keynote speakers alongside Peter Beinar and our executive director, Maelys Cannon, at our advocacy summit in DC this spring. And because we platformed him in this way, when his team reached out to us a couple of weeks ago saying we need Christians to organize in support of Mohsen, we said absolutely yes. And we put together this petition. So I have the tiny URL there if you want to take a picture of it, or we can send a follow-up note with that. But I pulled up this quote because I think it shows the way that these issues are all intersected, particularly as we're thinking about the rise of Christian nationalism and far-right white supremacist politics here in the US and the impact it's had on immigration for all sorts of people. This case really draws that out. And so we're hoping people will sign, you know, regardless of what they might think about solutions in the Middle East, because, to quote the petition, the use of immigration enforcement to punish or deter constitutionally protected political expression threatens not only Mohsen, but also the freedoms upon which our nation depends. And so with that in mind, this petition has been organized. We're on our way to 500 signatures, hoping ultimately for 1,000. And I know the Middle East Task Force of Westminster Presbyterian Church has also signed organizationally, but local organizations and congregations are also welcome to sign with proper, authority and channels. So it's one opportunity. I mentioned last year's summit. We have registration already open for this year's summit, and we're getting bigger and bigger. How many of you have been to a Churches for Middle East Peace Summit in the past? Several of you, but lots of new faces in this room. And you're not very far from Washington, D.C., so this is a relatively low lift for all of you. But we gather together for about 2 days of learning and worship, and then 1 day on Capitol Hill. And you get advocacy training. We have specific asks. Our friends at the FC Friends Committee on National Legislation, plus our DC folks work together to train. And then here's a picture of, I'm from Boston. This is our Massachusetts delegation last year. So we actually had an ELCA bishop, Bishop Nathan Pipo was with us, and then an Episcopal priest from Salem, and then this young man who's actually of Middle Eastern origin. So the four of us got to go to Capitol Hill together and meet with our senators and my representative. But this is a really important and impactful way to put your voice into action. And the summits are getting bigger and bigger. So those of you that have gone before, there are maybe 100 people. We used to average 120. Last year we had 300, and this year we're seeking to have 500. And so early bird registrations are already available. you want to bring a little delegation from Westminster or from the community, let me know and we can work out a group rate for all of you. Would love that.
Everybody's already signed up.
yeah.
It's attending today.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know Mark and Carol have already registered. They took advantage of the early birds, so you'll get to join them. As they usually go to both New Jersey meetings and Delaware meetings. But it's a really, really great opportunity. And even for those who are already doing this work and already on board, the opportunity to be in community and to learn together and be rekindled to fan our flames and then go to Capitol Hill is really, really powerful. So encourage you to look into that. Summitforpeace.org, really easy to remember, and it's of course on the Churches for Middle East Peace website as well. And then finally, the last time I was here at Westminster Presbyterian Church, I was with the executive director of an organization called the Bethlehem Fair Trade Artisans, who are seeking to support the economic empowerment of their communities in times where they are being devastated by the lack of tourism, the lack of people there to see their shops, to do that work. And so inspired by that tour that we went on with Suzanne, we have launched a new partnership with Serve International. Do you all know Serve for their fair trade work? They work all over the world, but the Bethlehem Fair Trade Group are one of Serve's partners in the Middle East. And so we're partnering with them to offer some special opportunities for our communities to support artisans on the ground through fair trade practices and also support the ministry of Churches for Middle East Peace at the same time. So you're starting to think about Christmas gift shopping. The Advent season is not all that far away. Encourage you to think about supporting Palestinians in this way. And Serve does all of the distribution work, but they've worked with us to have a curated catalog that features some beautiful, beautiful pieces. You can see a couple of them here in our logo. And we'll have more coming. There's also like trunk show opportunities. So if that appeals, we'd love to have a couple of volunteers work to do a trunk show with Serve and feature goods from the Middle East. You could even include items from other ministry areas of interest to the congregation around the holiday season or in the fall or whenever that might appeal. So encourage you also to check that out. And so with that, I am going to stop and I think we can stop the recording and I'll come back to your question. And while Mark works on the recording, if you're not already on Churches for Middle East Peace's mailing list and you would like to be, to get updates like this, we send one bulletin every Friday that has news updates and initiative updates. I'm going to pass